Good evening, everybody. To Attorney Carol Hallstrom, to Attorney Frank Goldsmith, to Chief William Anderson, to County Sheriff Van Duncan, to Ms. Orlean Simmons, to all distinguished guests assembled, and the community of Asheville, North Carolina, and Buncombe County. There's a powerful poem that results. There's a destiny that makes us brothers and sisters. None goes this way alone. All we send into the lives of others come back into our very own. And then there's a Negro spiritual that says, if I can help somebody as I travel along this way, my living will not be in vain. With these sentiments in mind, on behalf of the United Community for Justice, various organizations and groups assembled of Asheville, North Carolina, we and the congregation of St. James African Methodist Episcopal Church extend to you pleasant greetings. Welcome to our very first community forum, whereby we have come to begin a series of community discussions concerning the national issues of Trayvon Martin and how we should respond to the aftermath as a community and establish how to handle interactions with law enforcement. Tonight's forum will only serve as the beginning of such a dialogue, and from this further deliberations can be established. And by way of announcements, we want to invite everybody, if you haven't tried it already, we have some hot St. James croaker fish next door. So please visit our kitchen, and just a little bit grease won't hurt you. But nevertheless, we want to say welcome, welcome, welcome. And just give yourselves a round of applause for being here as concerned citizens of our country and nation. And let me take this time to present a very hardworking woman, Attorney Carol Hallstrom, chairperson of the United Community for Justice. Let's give her a hand as she comes.
Good evening. Look what we pulled off in such a short time. I, too, congratulate you for being here tonight. I'm Carol Rogoff Hallstrom, and I'm one of the organizers of tonight's convening. And certainly on behalf of the organizers and Pastor Edwards, I think on behalf of everybody here, we want to thank you for not only hosting us, but for making us all feel so very welcome. So please, for the pastor, for St. James AME, thank you. Thank you so much. Look around, and I'm reminded that quite deliberately, we are an interracial and an interfaith gathering. That we are an interracial and an interfaith gathering because we're here to talk about things that are not about one community in Asheville, not about one community in Buncombe County, but about matters that concern all of us who are interested in justice for all of our communities, who are interested in exploring and understanding our rights and responsibilities as members of the community, as well as employees of law enforcement agencies. So why are we here tonight? There may be some different opinions about the Florida verdict. That is possible. What we can agree on is that a young man is dead. So why are we here? When we've come together, organizers of this evening's meeting, we felt very strongly that we were not here to retry the Trayvon Martin case. What we agreed we wanted to do was explore for our community, explore for Asheville, explore for Buncombe County. How can we make sure that we know and that we understand North Carolina gun laws? That we know and we understand what neighborhood watch groups can legally do and what they cannot do. We want to make sure that we understand our rights and responsibilities as community members, and that we understand the rights and responsibilities of law enforcement personnel. We want to understand how to hold ourselves accountable, and we want to understand how to hold law enforcement accountable as we interact with them. We felt that tonight, most importantly, was about prevention. Most importantly, tonight, from our perspective in organizing this event, was about preventing similar interactions, similar tragedies in our community. We've invited Civil Rights Attorney Frank Goldsmith, Asheville Police Department Chief William Anderson, Buncombe County Sheriff Van Duncan to talk with us each for no longer than 10 minutes. You'll help me make sure that happens, particularly for the lawyer. Sir. That we would explore with these three gentlemen these critical issues, and after each of them has had the opportunity to make his opening comments, that with the help of Tyrone Greenlee, Deirdre Wiggins facilitating us, that we will then invite questions. Questions, again, about what we can do to keep our community safe. Now, the organizers have asked, and with the help of the church, with the help of some of our colleagues, that we are videotaping for the sake of future teaching our forum this evening. If for any reason anybody is not comfortable being videotaped, just say so. If you want to ask a question and you don't want to be videotaped, that's fine. Let us know. The organizers, again, have felt that there is an educational value for the future of what we're doing. Now, to make tonight work, we need your help, and we really do need your help. And we know that we are not going to resolve all of these challenges tonight. We recognize that. You recognize that. This is a beginning, though, and both the chief and the sheriff have made a commitment to us, and by extension to you. As we take these conversations out into the communities in coming months, the chief and the sheriff have committed to joining us in doing so. At the end of the program, my colleague Orleen Simmons will talk a little bit more about what our future plans are once we use tonight for an informational base. So I would ask you to help us keep the focus tonight. Again, we hope that you will join us in the future for these conversations. We hope you will bring your concerns, your ideas, your suggestions. Thank you so much for joining us. Frank?
Thank you very much, Carol, or should I say Lawyer Holstrom. I am really honored to be asked to be a part of the panel here and to share the podium with Chief Anderson and Sheriff Duncan. Carol told you that I was a civil rights lawyer. That is true. I have been practicing, or at least a large part of my practice has been civil rights law for longer than I like to have to confess, but let's just say about 40 years after getting out of my military service. And part of that practice has involved civil rights law as applied to the police and to law enforcement. And I will tell you that I have, during that career, I've probably sued most of the sheriff's departments in western North Carolina and many of the municipalities. And I'm confessing that to my co-panelists, but lest you think that I am biased against law enforcement because of that, I will also tell you that I have had the honor and privilege of representing law enforcement in many occasions. I've represented a great number of law enforcement officers whose own civil rights had been violated, and I have served as the local attorney for the Fraternal Order of the Police in my home county of McDowell County. So I am going to try to be objective with you and to try to share with you as objectively as I can my perspective on the legal issues that arise from the Trayvon Martin case. not, as Carol said, for the purpose of rehashing that verdict and determining whether that was the right verdict under Florida law, because I don't know Florida law. I don't know the facts of that case. I have found in my career that often what you read in the media about cases bears very little resemblance to what went on in the courtroom. And so rather, I want to use the fact pattern that emerges from that case, that is, an encounter between an unarmed 17-year-old young man on his way home and an armed, untrained, out-of-shape local vigilante who was a member of a community watch organization. That's what I know about the Trayvon Martin case. So I want to talk briefly with you, because I only have a few minutes to do this, about the legal issues that arise from that kind of encounter and encounters between both law enforcement and civilians and armed private citizens and civilians. In terms of the encounters that occur between law enforcement, and I won't spend very much time on this, there is really a sliding spectrum, if you will, of those kinds of encounters, and they are all governed by the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. That says that persons may not be seized. It also says places cannot be searched, but we're talking about the seizure of a person cannot be seized except for probable cause, and that warrants for the arrest of a person or for the search of premises cannot occur except for probable cause. But that's pretty vague, so we need to see how that is fleshed out in real life. And so those encounters can begin with something as simple as a police officer asking somebody a question. Where are you going? What's your name? Show me your identification. Would you permit me to look inside your belongings? There is nothing wrong legally with any of those questions. Officers have the right to ask such questions. The next stage in this scale, if you will, would be what we call a stop and frisk. And that name comes from, it's sometimes called a Terry stop, because the case comes from Terry versus Ohio in 1968. And in that case, the Supreme Court held that it was permissible for a police officer to stop and briefly detain a citizen if that officer had reasonable suspicion that criminal activity was afoot. And that's really those are the words that the Supreme Court used. But the officer has to have reasonable suspicion. There has to be some basis in fact, in something that the officer can articulate as to why that particular individual was stopped on that occasion. It cannot be based on a hunch. And the citizen must be free to go if the citizen wants to. And so the standard really is, would the citizen understand that he or she was free to go? Or is the officer using such a display of authority that the citizen would not think that? And there have been a number of cases involving that. The most recent occurred this week. There was a class action lawsuit brought in New York against the City of New York Police Department by a class composed of African Americans and Hispanics who alleged that they were unfairly and disproportionately targeted by the police because of their race or ethnicity. And indeed, in that case, the Judge Steinland, found that there were 4.4 million Terry stops in New York City, 80% of which involved members of those groups, of either blacks or Hispanics. And that most of those were followed by a frisk. It wasn't simply a detention, but was followed by a frisk, a search of the person, the officer putting his or her hands on that person. And that only in 1.5 of those frisks was a weapon discovered. That's the only justification, by the way, for a frisk. So the judge has issued an order enjoining the city from these kinds of practices, and time does not permit me to go on into that case, but that is another stage in the spectrum. And then for a full-blown arrest, an officer must have probable cause with or without a warrant. And that is governed both by federal constitutional law and by North Carolina state law. State laws cannot restrict federal constitutional rights, but they can expand upon them. And in certain cases, they do that. But I want to leave the talk about interactions between law enforcement and citizens to my colleagues on the panel if they want to address that. You have heard the term a citizen's arrest. And indeed, it may be possible that that's what George Zimmerman thought he was trying to do when he encountered Trayvon Martin. In North Carolina, there really is no such thing as a citizen's arrest, except in one very limited circumstance. And that is where an officer seeking to make an arrest requests a citizen to assist in that arrest, and then that citizen is cloaked with the same basic right that the officer had and is immune from liability. What we do have is a citizen's right to detain, not to arrest, but to detain. But that detention can only occur if the citizen sees the commission of a crime, and it has to be certain kinds of crimes, a felony, a crime of violence, that occurs in the citizen's presence. And the detention has to be reasonable. The statute does not say what that means, but the case law indicates that it does not involve the use of physical force and certainly not deadly force by a civilian. The cases are things like where a supervisor at work stands in a doorway to block the exit of somebody until they can ascertain whether or not a crime was committed in that workplace. That kind of behavior. So it cannot be excessive force that is used by a citizen, and the citizen can detain only for so long as it takes for the citizen either to determine that no crime was committed or to turn that person over to a law enforcement officer. There is a duty immediately to turn that person over to a law enforcement officer. So those are some of the issues that arise in the facts of this case. The other issue that people have been concerned about and that you've heard a lot about are what we call the stand your ground laws, the right of self-defense. North Carolina and most states have always had a right of self-defense and have always said that you can stand your ground in your own home. If an intruder breaks into your home and you have a reasonable fear that the intruder is intent on doing you bodily harm or killing you, you have a right to stand your ground and use deadly force if necessary. In 2011, our legislature expanded that right, and they provided that this sort of stand your ground right applies also to vehicles, when you're in your vehicle, or when you're in your workplace. So your home, your vehicle, or your workplace are places where that expanded right of self-defense applies. And the statute, the North Carolina statute, says that it is presumed if somebody is intruding in your home or is in your home and refuses to leave and has gotten there by force, it is presumed that you are in fear of your bodily safety or of death. Now, even there are cases where that right of self-defense does not apply. You cannot have been the aggressor, for example, in bringing on the conflict. If you are the aggressor, you lose your right of self-defense. Florida law may be different about that. I am not sure. The only way in that situation, if you're the aggressor and you initiate the conflict, that you can have your right of self-defense restored is if you give up the fight and you clearly signal to your opponent that you are walking away from the fight, it's over as far as you're concerned, and then if the opponent continues aggressive activity towards you that puts you in reasonable fear of death or bodily harm, then you can use deadly force to repel that attack. The other limitation on that right is that you cannot use excessive force. So the force has to be balanced with the nature of the attack upon you. If I strike you with my fist, you can't pull out a gun and shoot me. That's excessive force. So those are some of the legal framework that governs these situations, such as perhaps arose in the Trayvon Martin case. It's a complicated law. There are a lot of other exceptions to it. You don't have that same right of self-defense, for example, if it's a law enforcement officer coming into your home or a bail bondsman. The statute protects both of those. So in North Carolina, my feeling is that the result of what I know of the facts of the Trayvon Martin case, which, as I said, may be flawed knowledge, based on what I know of those facts and what I know of the law of North Carolina, I believe the jury may have been differently instructed than it apparently was in Florida, and I like to think that the outcome could have been different if the jury had simply applied the law to the facts. Now, does that guarantee that there will never be racial bias in a jury verdict? Absolutely not. We all know that. But in terms of what the law requires, I think that's a synopsis and I sense that Carol is about to pull the hook on me and tell me that my time is up. She is nodding. That's a synopsis of what North Carolina law has to say about this situation. I'll be happy to entertain questions during the question and answer section that follows. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Good to be here with y'all. And this speaks really well for our community that we have a wonderful turnout like we have tonight. Thank you to Reverend Edwards for hosting at the church. One thing that we definitely agreed on as a panel as we started talking about putting this forum together is that we hope we never have an incident like Trayvon Martin occur in Buncombe County or Asheville. Could it happen? Sure. And we all felt very strongly that the outcome of what would take place after something like that depends on what happens before it takes place. In the dialogue, in the relationships, and in the understandings and trust that go on within the community. So we felt it was very important to come out and talk and answer questions and maybe give some background on the law. I am not going to debate Frank as much as Carol would like me to. I am not going to do that because I would lose. And I don't think you've ever sued while I've been there, so I'm good that we're going to stay out of that. So talking a little bit about self-defense. And when you talk about North Carolina, you talk about something that's called the Castle Doctrine that has been in existence for quite some time. And as Frank said, it has been extended to cover vehicles and to cover places of business, and we'll get into that in just a second. But North Carolina has always given a person the right of self-defense. And that's not just in the home, but there are some qualifiers for that self-defense to take place. One, you can't be the aggressor. Two, you have the obligation of reasonable retreat. So if somebody starts an action against you in public, and you have the ability to retreat, disengage, get away, you have that obligation of reasonable retreat. Now, where that doesn't apply, and believe it or not, very much the same standard for using deadly force by a law enforcement officer is very much the same thing as for a civilian, except there is no obligation of retreat because the law enforcement officer is called to be there and has a responsibility for the outcome of the situation that they were called there to take care of. In your own home, and you guys have probably heard this, if you have to shoot somebody, pull them in your house, right? And we do, y'all heard it, come on, I know that's not the first time you've heard that. And what that really comes from, it's not really so. What it comes from, something that we could talk about a little further. There's a couple things, reasonable person and totality of circumstances that come into play when you're looking at a self-defense situation. So if someone is breaking in your house and they are in your residence, it is already assumed that they are there to do harm. So a person in North Carolina could use deadly force at that point in time to stop that person who has broken into the house, whether they are armed or not armed. But what I'll also say is if you come out with a flashlight and a firearm, you confront that person, they turn and they run out the door, your ability to defend yourself stops at the point, and I mean ethically it stops at the point when you know the person's turning to flee and not gonna, and we can debate the totality of the circumstances and what happens there, and it's pretty specific to the individual cases. But if you follow the person out of your house, you've lost all that right of using deadly force for self-defense. Like I say, it's totality of the circumstances. I agree with everything that Frank said. One thing, if you're in public and you say somebody uses a fist and they're starting to physically assault you, you can't use a gun, but there are probably some totality of the circumstances where you could, such as the assaulter is a younger, larger person, and the victim might be an 80-year-old female. or a person who's disabled in a wheelchair. That's where that totality of the circumstances comes into play. Where North Carolina basically stepped up and extended those rights of the Castle Doctrine in 2011 was to a vehicle that you were traveling in and to a place of business. So if you are in your place of business, after hours, someone breaks in, or you're in your business and someone comes in and tries to rob that business, your rights theoretically of not having to retreat have been extended to you in your place of business. In a vehicle, if someone comes up to your vehicle, and that's where the totality of the circumstances and the reasonable person thing comes into play. If they come up to your vehicle and in a manner to open the door to get inside that vehicle to where a reasonable person would believe that they intend to cause them serious bodily harm or death, then the Castle Doctrine has been extended to be able to use self-defense. I am not aware of any cases, Frank, in North Carolina where that's actually occurred in a vehicle, but there are some pretty high-profile cases in North Carolina where it's happened in a business, and charges have not been sought out by the district attorney or the sheriff's office. And I think it was the sheriff's office, I believe, in Rockingham County, the one I'm thinking about, to where someone came into a business. So let me give you a caveat by saying, from someone who has worked situations where someone has used deadly force completely justifiably, it's the last thing you ever want to have to do. We talk, we get into a lot of community meetings that I attend quite a bit out in the county, and folks are upset. They've had their houses broken into, they've had some security taken away from them, and they're upset. And it's like, somebody comes in my house, I'm going to shoot them. Well, of course, we all have those visceral responses to having our security taken away. But what I will tell you, when that happens, even when you're 100% legally justified and even morally justified, if somebody's coming in and they're trying to harm you or your family, the bad thing has just begun to happen. And that's what I try to explain to folks, because everybody has a family, and hopefully everybody has a conscience, and you question what you've done. So this is a great opportunity for us to get out in the community and talk about these issues with folks, because in law enforcement, we always say you react to how you train, or you react to how you pre-think through situations. So this is a really good opportunity for folks to get the opportunity later to ask questions about that and pre-think through some of these things. How much time we got left, Carol? About 5 minutes? I'm good. Okay. I usually, see, Tim, I can be short and brief. Let's talk a little bit about Community Watch. Community Watch is something we are extremely supportive with. Community Watch probably prevents and helps us solve more crime than about anything else out there. A community member that's looking out for neighbors and taking information and doing those kind of things extremely enhances the ability of law enforcement to put resources where they need to be, to run down issues and things that we normally wouldn't know about from just a law enforcement perspective. Carl Ketterjohn is here, and he is the head of Crime Stoppers. That 250-5050 number has been huge for us in being able to get information in to solve crimes. So an aware community is a good thing. We would never instruct a Community Watch member to track, stay with, track down, interact with somebody that's breaking the law. They would have very much gotten an issuance of what they should do from dispatch, just like George Zimmerman got. Do not follow this person. Do not engage with this person. We tell Community Watch all the time, you are our eyes and ears, and that's it. As you start to engage, bad things can happen. How many of you have teenage kids? Me too. What I try to really point out to my son, particularly, and I think the chief's going to get into this in greater detail, especially when you're out operating a motor vehicle. You see a lot of this road rage stuff going on out on the highway. And because of North Carolina's Castle Doctrine applying to a car, I tell my son, let it go. If somebody comes by, disrespects you, cuts you off, whatever, let it go. Call law enforcement. If it's something that's serious, don't follow the individual. Get a tag number, explain what's going on, call it in, and give the information. But then you have met your obligation there and let it go. Because now what happens is, with the expansion of the Castle Doctrine, is if somebody gets extremely upset, they get out of a vehicle, they go to the vehicle that they feel has wronged them in whatever way, and they start to open that door, it's going to be another case of witnesses, who do you believe, criminal backgrounds, what they might have posted on Facebook in the past, all those things, sir? All those things that come into play when they start to figure out what that criminal case is going to be. So we're going to have some opportunities here shortly for questions, comments, and I know that we want those to happen. But at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Chief William Anderson, and he's going to talk about responding to the police if you're pulled over.
Good evening. It's an honor to be here as well and see such a good crowd who has come out this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens if you're stopped by the police, but mainly my message is really geared to our young folks and some of the encounters that they might have. Let me start off by saying that the death of Trayvon Martin was a tragedy. For me, and in my opinion, it was a clear-cut case of a police wannabe overstepping his authority, and an innocent young man is dead. The purpose of me being here tonight is to educate, to talk a little bit about prevention, to give you, the audience, and especially our young folks, some pointers on how to avoid run-ins with the police, and if you do have an encounter, how it could have a positive outcome. I'm hoping that maybe what I cover here tonight might just save another innocent young person from dying or getting themselves into serious trouble with the law. We know Trayvon was not killed by the police, but all too many of our youth run afoul of the law. And I hope the following information and the information that I'm going to cover here this evening can help our young folks, and you take it back to your young folks if you have them, on how to deal with some of the issues when dealing with the police. What to do if you're stopped by the police, especially if you are a young person. We know that if you are a young person in America, there is a high probability you will have some contact with the police, especially if you're a person of color. Statistics have already showed this. We teach our children that it's not a matter of if you will be stopped by the police, but when you will be stopped by the police. Now, that's not to say the police are doing anything wrong or not doing their job or racially profiling anyone. They may be simply following the law and have probable cause or reasonable suspicion for the stop, like Mr. Goldsmith spoke of earlier. It's important that we teach our children that when that initial stop occurs, that we make good choices, that we make good decisions. We avoid any type of confrontation, but more importantly, we especially know our rights, and especially make sure that they understand what their rights are. There are 3 basic rules if you are stopped. Show respect, cooperate, and be honest. If you're driving and you stop by the police, the blue lights come on behind you, slow down and pull over to the side of the road. Stay in the driver's seat with both hands in sight. Turn down your music so that you can hear what the officer is saying. Listen and comply with the officer's request. Do not speak rudely. We have to remember that officers are human too. They're not perfect, and we all make mistakes. And they can have a bad day, just like everyone else. When asked to provide your driver's license, do so. Provide your insurance card and registration. Most officers will not tell you the reason they are stopping you until they have your license in their hand. Your car can only be searched if the officer has probable cause or you give consent. You have the sign it. It's not an admission of guilt. It simply acknowledges that you have received the citation and you have the right to contest it in court. If you want to offer an explanation of why you were doing whatever, do it before the officer returns to his vehicle, because he or she cannot void the citation. If you're stopped by the police while walking through your neighborhood or on a public street, such as Trayvon was doing, answer all questions truthfully. Do not speak rudely, run, or walk away. The officer must have probable cause or reasonable suspicion to stop you. If the officer has reasonable suspicion you may be carrying a weapon, you may be patted down. Obey all requests unless it poses a threat to your safety. If you feel that it does, ask to speak with the officer's supervisor. What to do if you've been mistreated or suspect officer misconduct? Report it. Don't get angry and lash out. Ask to speak to the officer's supervisor. Go to the police department or sheriff's department and file a complaint. All complaints filed with APD are investigated, and you will be notified when the complaint is completed. In fact, you will receive a letter personally from me notifying you that the complaint has been completed. Misconduct will not be tolerated. I will not tolerate any misconduct. But first, it must be reported, and it must be reported accurately. Some of the other groups that can help in the community if you feel that you have had a bad experience with law enforcement is our local NAACP. And I know probably several members here in the audience that you can reach out to. The Asheville Buncombe County Community Relations Council is another local organization that can help anytime that you might have a negative encounter with the police. But I'll close by saying this. It is very, very important that we educate our children and we educate our youth, because that initial encounter that they have with law enforcement can be good or it can be bad. And we see all too often these encounters go the wrong way. So it's very, very important that we educate our young folks on how to deal with these type of situations should they be in an unfortunate position that they have to encounter law enforcement. A lot of the information that I passed out here tonight is part of a program called The Law in You, put on by NOBLE, which is a national organization of black law enforcement executives, and Allstate Insurance. My assistant in the back, she has probably about 50 copies of these. We really want to put them in the hands of our young folks. I think it's important if you have a teenage young person who's starting to drive, they need to read this. They need to understand what their rights are, how to handle themselves should they encounter a law enforcement officer. I think it will help them go a long way. Another pamphlet that we have is our Citizens Procedures for Employee Accommodations and Complaints. This will outline not only how to commend an officer, but also how to file a complaint with the police department. We appreciate this opportunity to come out and speak with you tonight. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions, but I think it's very important that we recognize what happened in Florida. And as the sheriff said, do everything we can to avoid and hope that we don't have a similar incident in our community. Thank you for coming out.
Yes, again, thank you for coming out. My colleague here, Trayvon Martin to my left, and I, Deirdre Wiggins, will be your facilitators for tonight. I think Trayvon will take the left and I'll take the right, and Johnny Grant is in the balcony. We do have a couple ground rules we'd like to go over before we start this question and answer, and it is a question and answer, period. It's not a conversation, and we just have to reiterate that there will be at future times time for conversations. But please first of all, keep your questions brief. And this is not a time for a soliloquy. And we reiterate that in respect for our panel. When you ask a question, please allow the time to finish, the percentage of time to finish, and do not interrupt. Also, if you don't want to be videotaped, please write your question out and give it to one of us, and we can do that for you. The restrooms are to the right, I think, and the ushers back there can show you if you need to. The sign-up sheets out front, please, if you haven't done so, please sign up for those so we can have future conversations about the email list. And I think that's about all. Tyrone, do you want to have anything to say with that? I'll be over here, and you'll be here, and we'll start the questions.
No, the only thing I would add to that was we ask that you, like Deirdre said, keep your comments brief, and we ask that you be respectful of our panelists and everyone in the room. We can do that, can't we? Say something. There we go. Good. Thank you.
Our first question is here.
Hi, good evening. My name is Annie Burton, and I have a question actually for all of the panelists. I heard a lot about, particularly I think from you, Chief Anderson, about how one comports themselves when dealing with law enforcement. And then I also heard data that was cited with respect to the number of minorities that typically get pulled over, or in many cases, some people say driving while black or driving while minority. What kinds of, and I want to just say this, qualify this by saying, as an African-American female and a mother of children, I obviously have the talk and then the talk with my boys in terms of what they're likely to confront as African-American males. My question, however, to law enforcement is what kind of measures do you put into place to train your officers on cultural sensitivity, which exists globally? And I've not heard one comment mentioned about that, because just as we as citizens have to show respect for law enforcement, and I understand they have bad days, but likewise, they need to also comport themselves as professionals in the field of law enforcement.
Thank you. And you to address this question to whom? Who did?
I think I'll start it out. One of the things that's required by the state is that we have to have annual training, and the state mandates that some of that training is focused on diversity, sensitivity, and issues like that. The other thing, I think it starts with the agency itself, and in our case, the agency heads, as far as what we talk to our officers about, the message that we try to send to our officers, what we will and will not tolerate, what our expectations are when dealing with the public and dealing with these very sensitive issues, trying to make sure that they are aware of the community's concerns and how important it is to have the community's trust getting out in the community and interacting with the residents and citizens of our community and hearing what their concerns are and the things that might be bothering them. It has to start with us. And we have to make sure that message is taken throughout the department and make sure that it's passed on.
One of the things that is required by the state is when officers pull a vehicle over, when they have that reasonable suspicion to pull a vehicle over, they have to fill out a form that basically shows the ethnicity, the race of the person that they're pulling over. So if we have an officer that is racially profiling in an area, those things are pretty obvious when we go pull the numbers. If we take a report on an officer, we say where there's smoke, there's fire, and that's very true. We can look at that officer's complaints, that officer's vehicle stops, use of force, and those type of things. And one thing about having a really good computer system is we're able to track all those things very well. Chief's talking about culture in an agency, and it really does drive what happens. You have policy and procedure, and then you have the culture of how things are done. And I will promise you, my officers know that I tell them all the time, do not behave in a way that I cannot defend, because it will be what it will be if you do. And I think that's understood. We, as law enforcement in the world that we live in now, we have to be extremely professional, extremely aware, and not just what the law allows, but also how we're being perceived in our interactions with the public. So those things are extremely important to us.
So we've got a question here, and I think we forgot to mention that Sorry.
I don't really have a lot to add to what the chief and the sheriff have said. Certainly the legal situation is that equal treatment is absolutely required. The 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution says that no person shall be denied the equal protection of the laws. That is the legal basis on which the federal judge in New York this week issued her injunction against the New York City Police Department. She examined the reports that were filled out by the officers on the stop and frisk cases, the 4.4 million stop and frisk cases, not all of them, but a representative sample, the forms such as Sheriff Duncan was talking about. And she determined that the information on those forms was insufficient to justify the stop in many cases, and that this was disproportionately impacting the African American and the Hispanic population in that city. So there is a legal basis to challenge it. I have every confidence in these departments that will not occur, but should it occur, should that kind of profiling occur, there is a legal remedy available.
Now, we will do a little round robin here. We have a question on this side, then we'll go up to the balcony, then we'll go back to this side. Right?
Sheriff Duncan, this is a question for you. What stood out for me when you were making your comments was when you talked about even if you're justifiably using deadly force, that you might want to consider that everybody has a family. And I would like you to make that very plain. I want you to tell us exactly what you're talking about. And if you have an example, without using names, about some time that somebody did something that they regretted later, I think that's good information for us to have.
I do. And what I mean by that is there is that burden that you carry after that encounter, from that you have taken another human life. And as far as the regretful part, I can tell you that I personally know officers who have been in deadly force confrontations where they were justified to the letter. They didn't regret it, but what they didn't figure into the equation was the fact that they got calls from family on birthdays, they got death threats. One particular officer that I know ended up moving the family out of the community that they lived in. So there are consequences after. It is a extremely serious decision to make, and even if you're in the right legally and even morally, there's still all kinds of considerations after that time that you need to think about.
Okay, Johnny, you got somebody up there?
Thank you, Tyrone.
Yes, my name is Ken Moore. I work at Wendy's Restaurant in Biltmore, and I've been a resident of Asheville for 20 years now. And most of the time I've been homeless, and so I do have a story to tell. We understand that search and seizure law, sir, and we understand, sir, that we have to protect ourselves also. But what we want to know now is that, what can be done to help the homeless people like me out in the street who really hadn't done much of anything. We just, we out there and I work for a living, So that's the question I want to ask each three of you gentlemen. And if y'all can just give us a little background on what can happen for us in the future, not just about the people, we all the people, but still, right now we really need help here. And
I'm not really understanding your question. Do you feel like
I'm a professional? I truly am a suspect, and there have been times where I've been just on the street and just trying to lay down and sleep, and I've come woke up by the police, and sometimes you're not even on private property, but you get run off from one property to the other, and then there's no place for us to go. So I just want you guys to just try to address that a little bit to me, and if there's anything you can do to help me, I appreciate it. If you can't help me, just resource me to somebody that can help me, please.
Thank you.
I think the best information I can give you is that we have several organizations within the city of Asheville that focus on the homeless issue. AHOPE, Homeward Bound, the Asheville Housing Authority is doing a lot to help people find housing and things like that. So I would direct you to maybe some of those organizations who could probably assist you with some of your concerns.
We have a question here. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, Chief, but here's the thing. I know all those people you've addressed me to, and so far I'm not getting much done. And what I'd like to do, it's going to be really cold pretty soon, and I just want somebody, who can maybe speed things. I don't want to twist nobody's arm, I'm homeless on the street. I mean, you know what I'm saying? But I know it's a lot of other people out there like me,
I think we can have some follow-up for the young man that just spoke later on. I have a question here.
Hi, my name is Luala Woodbine. I was on my way to work this morning, and I heard on the radio that you have to make a quota. And if you're not making a quota, you're not writing tickets, then you don't need that job. I was listening this morning. It says, if you're not writing tickets, your sergeant, your lieutenant, the captain don't look good. That means you're going to have to hunt for another job. That's what I heard this morning on the radio. Are we doing that here?
We don't have anything like that in the Asheville Police Department. Quotas are basically illegal, and we don't have anything like that in our department.
Citations are a tool to keep the community safe, and they're a tool that's not the only tool available to the officer. And one of the things that we try to really enforce and encourage our officers at the sheriff's office, if you can alter that behavior that's causing the public safety concern without a ticket, you don't have to write one. You can also write a warning ticket to basically document the interaction if you need to. And sometimes the best thing that happens if you get the response from that individual that they're going to slow down or they're going to alter that behavior that we're responsible for making sure stays within safe limits, then you don't need to write a citation. But no, we don't have a quota. We encourage trying to influence folks to do the thing that keeps public safety in front, and that doesn't always involve writing a ticket.
Got a question right here?
Are there any specific rules about community watch volunteers carrying weapons, number one? And number two, it may not have been a legal act of aggression, but I think the first thing that Mr. Zimmerman did that might be considered an act of aggression was he got out of the car when he was told not to by a law enforcement dispatcher. What are the rules here about listening to law enforcement officers when you're a community watch person who might be a law enforcement wannabe?
I would tell you that we cover that in community watches if the situation comes up to where you have somebody that has a concealed carry permit, so they can legally carry that gun off their premises. We make sure to reinforce with them that you in no way need to interact with somebody who is breaking the law to follow or to try to engage. Even though they have that ability to carry that concealed weapon legally, if they have that permit, I think we have about 4,000 in Buncombe County that legally have a concealed carry permit, they still have that obligation under self-defense that they can't be the aggressor, and they have to show that they had the ability to retreat, a reasonable ability to retreat, or they're not going to be able to make that self-defense claim.
And I think, too, we try to focus people on being an extra set of eyes and ears, not getting involved into an issue like Zimmerman did down in Florida. Report it to the police. Call us and let us come and check out the situation, not get yourself involved into any type of situation like that. We try to stress that and encourage that.
I don't really have anything to add to what the sheriff and the chief said, except that obviously if you don't have a lawfully issued concealed carry permit, you cannot walk around with a concealed handgun. And even if you have such a permit, that does not give you the right to use deadly force unless it's in self-defense with all the restrictions that we talked about earlier. So you don't become some sort of wannabe cop or substitute cop or vigilante by virtue of having that permit.
Johnny?
Hello, my name is Michael Hayes with the Urban Arts Institute and Associate Pastor of Agape World Outreach. Our question is for Sheriff Duncan and for Chief Anderson. Sheriff Duncan, you spoke about the officers having a disposition of pre-thinking certain situations that happen. Now, we spoke, Chief Anderson, you spoke about the police pulling over, can pull you over, and you can deny them searching your car. Do you have that same, because this is for my young people, I got to be able to tell them when they're walking through their own neighborhood and they get stopped, they have to know, can they resist being searched? Can they say, well, so I prefer you not search me, show their ID, but as far as the searching go, what can they do about that? What can we tell our young people about that?
Actually, an officer doesn't have the ability to ask you for your driver's license and your ID unless they have a reasonable suspicion that you're involved in some sort of criminal behavior when they stop you. What I would suggest, though, as Chief Anderson said, it's better to, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you bring me a situation where an officer's engaged in unlawful behavior, it's better to bring it to me in the office than resist it in the street. And if they have done that, anything that they may discover or that they may find by acting illegally will not be able to be used in court against that individual by law. I think what Frank was talking about earlier, and that's why we have these checks and balances. A Terry frisk is there so officers can protect themselves against someone who may be carrying a weapon. And law enforcement's a very dangerous job. But the reason why the checks and balances are there is because some officers have used that ability to protect themselves to go into pockets, to discover illegal substances, and that's when we have to come behind and check those numbers and that documentation of why those things are occurring. But it's kind of long-winded, but just to say, no, I would not resist publicly or in the street, because when that officer interacts, they may or may not be acting lawfully, but it's better to determine and hold that individual accountable afterwards than why the situation's evolving.
But when you're dealing with the community of young people that already have a fear of the police because of past situations, how can you really say what a probable cause is? Not to start, a band or going back and forth, but what is probable cause when they are in the Hillcrest community, the African American male going from one side of the street to the other side of the street, where in Kenilworth, it could be the same situation with a young white person going from one side of the street to the other side of the street, but they don't get stopped and frisked. The young black person gets stopped and frisked because there's a presence of officers there. So they're more likely to be asked for ID or can I frisk you? So, it has to be a way that our young people can know that, okay, I'm not going to be profiled. I'm just going from one place to another regardless of the fact that I got dreads or because I walk with a limp or because I have a certain color on that matches another person that I'm with. Because if I'm not mistaken, if two of them are together with the same color on and they're just standing there idly, then they can be stopped and searched. They could be standing there idly waiting on the bus or a cab or waiting on a ride to go to work with the same color on, but they can be stopped. So, how can we address our young people to instill in them a sense of pride and dignity so they won't have to go through these same things?
And I think that's what I was talking about earlier, how important it is to educate our young people on how to deal with these type of situations using a program that I referred to, the Law in You, coming out, meeting with these young folks, young men, and explaining different situations and things that happen exactly like you are describing, and how to handle themselves should they get involved in a situation like that. And if they feel that they've been mistreated, there's been some type of officer misconduct, how to report that so that we can address it with our officers and make sure they are doing the right thing. But I think the most important thing that we need to teach our young folks right now is how to deal with some of these situations. Like I mentioned earlier, not lashing out, not resisting on the street, but dealing with it, as the sheriff said, in the office and letting us address it. But getting back to what I said earlier, I think education and working with them to get that message out is the most important.
Let me add this thought too, if I may, and this may get to what you were talking about. There is absolutely nothing wrong with a young person who believes that they have been stopped for no good reason at all with asking the officer, am I under arrest? Am I free to go? Why did you stop me? I would do that in a totally polite and civil manner, but there's nothing wrong with asking that question. And if the officer cannot explain why the person is being stopped and what grounds they have to detain him further, they should let them go.
Thank you. That's what I need to know.
I do kind of want to add something on and then get on to questions. A lot of times perception's reality, right? We in law enforcement, especially from an administrative end, I think here's where perceptions are really skewed between the general public and what our perceptions are. A lot of folks would say we would come complain, but we know how law enforcement does. You're going to cover up for each other, and you're not going to address it with that officer. I will tell you at an administrative level, covering for an officer is a ticking time bomb for myself or the chief. If I have an officer who is out there acting illegally, conducting themselves in that manner, we need to know, because the best thing we can do for our agency and for the other good officers who are doing things the right way is to identify that officer and get rid of them. It's a ticking time bomb. The thinking that we cover up for officers, it isn't sustainable. There's bad days coming if we engage in that kind of thing.
My name is Jackie Sims, and I have the dubious honor of being the president of my neighborhood association in Buncombe County. I also have the even more difficult position of having been the one who suggested several months ago that we start a neighborhood watch in our neighborhood. One of the officers said, we don't want to get into all of that, and, why didn't I listen? I researched what was available in Buncombe County. I made them aware of what was available. I contacted the officer who does a very excellent job of community watch orientation, what it is and what it isn't. And and we made arrangements to have a neighborhood watch meeting, which I'm glad we did. My question, however, is I want to point out that it's particularly difficult as an African American to be in that position now. It is particularly difficult because I don't want to have anything to do with anything that looks like what happened in the Trayvon Martin case. And I want it to be clear to all my neighbors that I want nothing to do with that. What advice can you give to me when I hear my neighbors making jokes about going to get their milk, and as a euphemism for gun, and going out to investigate anything that they hear going on in their yard? Or when I hear stories about a teenage boy in the neighborhood home with a younger sibling, reporting that a black person came to his backyard and he got his gun and went out after him. I guess those are my questions.
I think if those come up when, is it Robin Michael Love? Is it the city or the county's Robin? I think Robin will tell you, use her when you put your community watches together to basically explain to folks what their roles are and what they aren't. And we get community watches that get people participating for the wrong reasons sometimes. And use that officer who's there in the initial setup to be able to call those folks away from your community watch, because nobody wants those folks involved, especially us. So that's probably what I would rely on, and make sure you're comfortable with that group of folks in your community watch, that they're there to keep the neighborhood safe before Corporal Michael Love leaves out.
And I'll just add, what we try to do in the city is to encourage community watch groups to invite the officers from their area to attend the meetings. We would like to have an officer at every community watch meeting throughout the city, and that way they can hear some of these comments if they're made. They can provide information to the residents and maybe curtail some of that mentality that might be out there. But I think it's important to have the officers at your meetings.
My name is Juanita Owens. I want to know who's investigating crimes that are committed by the city or the DA. Mr. Anderson, I came to your office one day to file a complaint and was escorted out by 3 police officers before I could even file the complaint.
I think the best thing to do, well, first of all, you and I need to talk about it, because I'm not familiar with the situation, so I'll be happy to talk about it with you after the meeting and find out what happened. But we encourage people to come to our police department and file a complaint if they have an issue with our police department.
Johnny?
Chaplain Zachary of the Healing Love Institute. I'd like to mostly make a comment. I really commend the people who organized this. And Chief Anderson, I enjoyed your comments about it was getting close to the structure of the black family and what we need to say to our children. And it brought back memories. I'm 63, and I grew up in the civil rights movement. And I can remember the mass meetings in a church like this in Alabama, and it would be full of young people. And what my question is, I think it is great to have this kind of forum, but where are the people that we're talking about? And until we can penetrate through the covers that we have put on these people to keep them silent, to keep them under, until we can go back and lift that up, we are, as Brother Paul said, fighting the air. I think that it is necessary to look at how we structure these kinds of forums. And what I mean, I've been going to these kind of forums most of my life. And I hope we are not headed for what Einstein said, to do the same thing over again and not get results. And that is in the American culture. And I think that it is time to dialogue, and I think that's one of the best ways. But we need to look at how we structure, and I honor you on the panel, but I think that until we get grassroots people, until we get the people who are really affected on all sides, we'll fight in the air. Thank you.
If I may, please reiterate, it is very important because of time constraints. Let's please try to keep the soliloquies to a minimum, and no disrespect intended. But if anyone has an issue,
We have one
that
more
involves
question.
First of all, I think it needs to be said that perhaps we didn't preface this, but this is the beginning. This is the beginning. It's not a conversation. There will be future conversations in the communities, and I think we did fail to say that the next one, I think, is going to be in Shiloh, October 22nd. That's tentative. But there will be, and I thank you for your comments, first of all. But I want to thank the panel, too, because this is a beginning. It's not perfect, but we are trying. And again, if you just would please keep it to a minimum, we'd appreciate it. Next question, I think, comes back here. And I don't know who raised it first. Willie.
My name is Willie Cameron, and I just want to say that there seems to be a problem with being black, period, to this day. And I don't want to talk long, but I will say that somehow the policemen need to maybe have something like, I agree with her, they need to get together, whereas they can be trained to know that black folk are not totally bad, you know. I'll give one example. In the 2000, I was at my house. The police came to my house looking for my older son. I was on the porch. My younger son was in the house. They came looking, white police came looking for my son, and they came to me and said, are you Alan Cameron? I said, no. They grabbed me. They say, you just stand right here. You just stand right here. My young son came out the house and said, that's not Alan Cameron, that's Willie Cameron. They still didn't believe him. My next door neighbor stepped to the front of her house and said, that's Willie Cameron. She was white. They let me go. That's, you know, to me, that's the whole problem. And I ain't gonna say nothing else, but they need some training.
Tyrell, I think we have a hand up here. Oh, the panel, okay. Was that a question, Willie? Were you really trying to ask a question?
The answer to Mr. Cameron's questions is yes. That is something we do try to instill in our officers, and I think it's good for them to hear these stories. I think it's good for them to come out to the meetings and hear these type of stories firsthand, because I do think sometimes we forget the other side. We have to put ourselves in your shoes sometimes to realize exactly the impact that we may have in some of the actions that we do. And that's the message that we try to send out to our officers. That's why we try to get them in the community, attend meetings like this, go to community watch meetings, listen to what the people are saying, and let's try to change the way we do things based on some of the feedback that we get.
You know, law enforcement, we're experiential learners in that nothing is more impactful for law enforcement officers, to include myself, than to be at these community dialogues and hear your stories and your perceptions and your interactions with law enforcement. I'm not going to give you the long, drawn-out details, but I can tell you it has changed my perspective on things in the 7 years that I've served as your sheriff, to attend community forums to understand all the dynamics in the community that are going on. So to answer this gentleman's question, we do quite a bit of that classroom training already. Is it effective? It's important for them to understand and know the law. Maybe marginally effective in changing attitudes if they hold some that we're not aware of. As this gentleman said upstairs, those conversations and community dialogues and talking about these things are tremendously impactful for our officers.
Okay. I've actually got a written question here that came in a while ago I'd like to get in. Why are there so few minority officers in the city of Asheville? What is being done to correct this?
That is something that we're trying to put a strong emphasis on, and one of the things that I was going to mention at the end of the night, if you know anybody who would like a career in law enforcement, send them our way. We definitely are recruiting. We're putting an emphasis on minority hiring, but quite frankly, we don't get a lot of applicants. We don't see a lot of, we see very few minority applicants here in Asheville. We've been sending our recruiters out across the state to the different law enforcement programs in some of the populations that have a higher number of minorities to try to recruit, but it's not something that we have been very successful at. So I encourage the pastors and people in the community. A career in law enforcement is a great career. I've been doing it for a long time, and I wouldn't change it. And I would encourage a young person to choose this career if this is something they want to do, and we'll do everything we can to improve that. But it's our goal, if we can figure out how to do it, to increase the number of minorities on our police department.
My name is Michael Crennan, and I want to speak on behalf of a lot of teenagers. And my question and comments are for all three of you on the panel. You know, I was raised to believe that you have to give respect to get it. And, you know, I did my time in the court system when I was a teenager. And, you know, Father Abbott down there, you know, once told me that we have to lead by example. So, I mean, isn't that what law enforcement is supposed to do? And, I mean, you know, but the other thing is that it's really scary to think about that a kid my age, you know, can get killed and not be able to finish college or even graduate high school. You know, it's pretty scary. And, you know, it's really kind of scary here because, you know, teenagers, we have to be in fear of law enforcement because they treat us different. And my pastor preaches from the pulpit up there, and he says, do not let anyone look down on you because you're young. And I think that should apply to law enforcement too. And I mean, I guess my question is like, why are we treated different than adults? Because if it's two adults that go at it in a fight, you pick the one that's the most wrong. But when it's a teenager versus an adult, it's always a teenager. And you know I'm right. And the thing about it is, the last thing I want to say after that question is, and this is for the chief and the sheriff, attitude reflects leadership.
I totally agree. You have to give respect to earn respect. And I think, like I said earlier, it has to start with us as the chief executives of these agencies. We have to instill those principles, or try to instill those principles in our officers. And it's something we have to monitor. And we need your help as the community to monitor that. If our folks are doing something wrong, we need to know about it so that we can have a chance to investigate it and take the appropriate action. But we need the community's help with that. It has to get back to us so that we can take the right action to make sure our folks are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're acting professionally. They're treating people with respect. They're being honest in their actions. Those are our guiding principles on the Asheville Police Department, and that's something that my expectation is that they adhere to them.
Also, you know, how this profession's changed over the past 20 years is incredible. And how we used to train our officers, how we train them to interact with people, and we continue to get better at doing that, because what you said is exactly right. To get respect, you have to give respect. And that's for both parties involved. So I appreciate your comments. I have a 17-year-old son. We have these discussions often. So I think these discussions are very beneficial. And what the chief speaks to, we need specifics. When there's complaints, we need specifics to where we can address with individual officers. It's hard to really address generalities sometimes. So we are working with ABCRC and other entities out here to make those complaint forms more available in Spanish, and to where you don't feel intimidated by having to come to the sheriff's office or the police department to file those complaints. And as with APD, we investigate all complaints.
With all due respect, Sheriff, I mean, your answer is excellent, sir. And I always believe in going to the source if you have a problem. But Chief Anderson, you still didn't answer my question, sir. Is why are we always treated differently? And that's, you know, and I'm coming to the source by saying that, sir. And it's your officers that I'm talking about, sir, is the fact that
you shouldn't be treated any differently than anybody else. And if you run into a situation like that, and it's going back to what the sheriff said, you need to bring it to me. You need to bring it to us so that we can address specifics. We need to know exactly what the issue is. If you've been mistreated, somebody has disrespected you, violated your rights, we need to know about it. We need to know about it when it happens and get that information to us so we can deal with those individual officers to address the problem.
but there's never any proof shown that anything's done about it because officers still act the same.
I think we need to kind of wrap this one up. This is sort of a subjective question. So let's just move along and maybe get back after this is over with to someone else, please. Thank you.
We have time for just 2 more questions, so we'll go to that side and come back to this side. And we apologize, you know, there's lots of you out there. I've got people stacked up over here as you do over there. And we tried our best to get everyone in, but we apologize for those who didn't get their question asked.
Hey, my name is Jeremy. You all haven't really elaborated on probable cause. Is that a subjective thing, or like, can you give a definition of probable cause to whomever wants to answer?
I don't know that I could give a definition of it, but it's an objective standard. There have to be facts that give an officer a reasonable basis for believing that a crime has been committed or is about to be committed in order for there to be probable cause. It cannot be a subjective hunch. It can't be guesswork. And there's a line between what is reasonable suspicion and what is probable cause. And probable cause requires more. But it is, when Sheriff Duncan spoke earlier, he talked about the totality of the circumstances. That's very much what it is. You have to look at the entire circumstances, but you have to be able to identify objective facts on the basis of which a reasonable person would conclude that criminal activity has occurred or is about to occur. And I welcome elaboration by my colleagues on the panel.
Sometimes we get reasonable suspicion and probable cause kind of intertwined, and they are 2 very separate things. If you go to the magistrate's office or a police officer makes a charge, a criminal charge, we have to show probable cause. We have to show that level, which is more likely that it has happened than it hasn't. That's the same level of proof or burden of proof for a search warrant. Now, when you're talking about reasonable suspicion, that's the ability for an officer to stop a vehicle, to interact with you on the street, to ask for an ID, to do those type of things. So it's actually 2 separate things, probable cause being a higher standard to make a criminal charge.
Bruce Kennedy's name. I certainly appreciate the conversation we've had this evening, but it's not the conversation I thought we were going to have this evening. community conversations about law enforcement and relationship to community, Michael's concerns, all these things. I think it's important for us to have these conversations. I thought we were going to have a conversation about specifically what we know imperfectly happened in Florida and how we use that as a learning moment, a teaching moment, both here in our community. You know, how do we call our neighborhood watch associations? How do we train our neighborhood associations to define better how we protect ourselves, be the eyes and ears, but not have people with armed people out, wannabe cops as have been defined? How do we reach out to our schools, to our children that aren't here tonight, and help them understand what Trayvon Martin should have done that day that might have kept him alive? That was the conversation I was hoping we were going to have, and maybe we can just address some of that and start that for the future.
If I may, Carol, would you like to address this? I just think that, again, this is the beginning, and we cannot address all the issues in an hour and a half or whatever, but this is the beginning of many conversations to come, and it's not supposed to be a conversation per se, but a presentation, and I think we have to give duty, a proper duty to the panelists here. They have tried to, I think, address these issues to the best, and this, again, is the beginning of many others to come, and we're just trying to, hopefully right now, streamline this process. So,
okay. If I may, let me address briefly that last question. I think one takeaway lesson from the Florida situation is that in North Carolina, we should be very, very reluctant to expand further these stand your ground laws and make them even more portable. And that is a political question. If your legislators hear you say that we don't want the ability to have a portable stand your ground where everywhere we go, we don't have to retreat, we can shoot first, then they need to hear that. That's the only way that these laws will not be expanded beyond the scope that they should be. So that's one lesson.
Good evening.
Well,
I'm sorry,
Arlene,
somebody else
give
had
us one more minute. This man has had his hand up for 15 minutes.
Thank
Third
you for
row
recognizing
from the
that.
back.
Yes, you have a question.
Please, sir, stand up.
Question.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I appreciate everybody on the panel. And I definitely do not want to see a Trayvon Martin situation here in Asheville. And I think it all started with the police in Florida. When the act was done, and all right, when the act was done, and they did not want to make an arrest on this person, so that goes back directly to our police here. Hopefully that will not happen here in Asheville. And I know that their chief lost his job from trying to cover up because it took so long before they made the arrest on Zimmerman. But had they done the proper thing like they should have done, a lot of this we would not have be going through today. And I'm sure for a lot of people who might not understand, I believe that we still have a manual for each police officer to learn and to know before they become police officers. And for citizens to be aware of this and to make certain complaints. We've covered this back in the 70s when J.C. Hall was our chief. That's how far I go back. And I'm not positive, but I would like that to be a question to the chief and the sheriff. Do we have a manual for the new officers? Thank you.
Yes, we do, and it's all part of our training. God forbid that we have a similar incident here in Asheville, but it all comes down to that initial investigation, making sure that all the bases are covered, making sure that we're interviewing all the witnesses, we're collecting all the evidence, and making sure that we have the true and complete story, and then presenting that story to the district attorney's office so that the right decision could be made. That's our responsibility, to make sure that that occurs in every case, in every crime, to try to make sure we make all the right decisions. We get everything right. We don't make any mistakes. We collect all the information and evidence, and then presenting that case to the district attorney to make sure that the proper charge is applied.
And we all have, if you're a sworn law enforcement officer, you're all taught by that standard in North Carolina. I think Florida, because of the stand your ground laws, it is a little tougher to dispute a self-defense claim from a civilian than what it would be in North Carolina. To be honest, I couldn't figure out how George Zimmerman got out from under culpability of being the initial aggressor. I don't know that it would have gone that way in North Carolina to begin with. I spent about 8 hours one day researching the case, and it came down to some real nuances about who was the aggressor in the end, and not saying I agree with the verdict or disagree, but that's kind of where the finalities came down on the law. But it was hard for me to understand why he wasn't immediately charged and had to show a little bit more proof that he was not the aggressor and he overstepped his bounds in self-defense. So I think it's a very good question. I think it's something we're all very aware of right now.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Please go ahead. I am Orlean Simmons, and I regret that we must conclude the conversation for this evening. But I'm going to try to answer some of your questions about what's next. This is not the end, but the beginning. We hope that this is the beginning of conversations in other neighborhoods. This kick-off community forum has been sponsored by the United Community for Justice. The names of our sponsors and our event organizers can be found in your program. Do we have any elected officials here with us tonight? If so, please stand, and also former elected officials. We'd like to know if you're here. Esther Manheimer was here. Who? Thank you. Anyone else? Lenny Sicknick is here. And how about our faith leaders? If you're here, you ministers, reverends, faith leaders, would you please stand if we have any here? Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Much information has been given to us by the presenters. Some of our concerns and questions may not have been answered tonight. Let us keep this conversation going long after this forum has ended. We need your help, please. If you have a question that you would like to leave for one of the presenters, to be on our mailing list for notification of upcoming events, to be a sponsor, host an event in your neighborhood, be a part of the organizing, we would like to know. Please give us your ideas, your suggestions. We would like to have them. We have a number of clipboards. Isaac Coleman, are you here with clipboards? We have a number of clipboards that are going to be circulated. Please leave us your information. Leave us your card. Leave us a note. But we would like for you to use the clipboard for your questions, hosting an event, how you can become involved, ideas. We need your help, please. Our next event is scheduled for October in the Shiloh community. We thank you so much for coming out, but please do not leave without leaving us information.